Whenever I think of aspects that define Call of Duty Zombies, one of the very first things that come to mind is Easter eggs. Easter eggs have always been this game mode's unusual way to deliver its narrative, even all the way back in World at War that was released nearly 15 years ago. It is truly astounding how long Easter eggs have been a staple of this mode, but since they've been a staple for that long, they're not always perfect. But before we go on any further with this topic, we need to first explain what are Easter eggs for those who don't know it. Normally in media like video games, TV shows, and movies, Easter eggs are meant to be hidden messages, jokes, or references put in by the developers. Most of the time, Easter eggs are meant to slightly increase the entertainment value of certain media, and they don't affect the narrative in any way, shape, or form. However, there are some exceptions to this, and one of these exceptions is Call of Duty Zombies. Easter eggs are map-specific quests that, when completed, will reveal the narrative behind the map that you're playing. The reason these quests are called Easter eggs is because the steps to completing these quests are very well hidden by the developers. Easter eggs in Call of Duty Zombies were initially treated the same way as other Easter eggs in other media. The difference is, though, is that the Easter eggs in this game mode required the player to be a lot more active. The gameplay of Easter eggs back then was a lot more simple and subdued, but now they've evolved into something far more complex and epic and narratively rich. But despite the many evolutions and changes to this concept, one thing that has always stayed the same with Call of Duty Zombies Easter eggs is their hidden nature. Now, let me ask you, the viewer, a question. When you have a concept like this that is nearly as old as the legal drinking age in some countries, and throughout that entire length of time, the developers have always tried to constantly raise up the ante of how complicated these Easter eggs are, yet how secretive they are, what do you think that will result to? That would, of course, result in the steps of these quests being, to put it lightly, fucking awful. There is truly no shortage of flavor with terrible Easter egg steps. Easter egg steps can be obnoxious, tedious, poorly unstable, inconsistent, nonsensical, and painfully boring. And today we are going to be covering all of it. We are going to be covering the worst Easter egg step in every single Easter egg from Black Ops 1 to Cold War. But before I begin, I need to mention a few things. First of all, if there is a map that has multiple Easter eggs like the Victus maps, I'm gonna only count them as a single Easter egg. Second of all, if there's an Easter egg that only has one step, like the Giant's Fly Trap or the Classified Round 150, I'm not gonna include them in this video because there's no point, they only have one step. Third of all, if there's any steps that can be skipped, like the Raw step in Ancient Evil or the Origins Robot step, then I won't be including them in this video. And finally, in the end of this video, we're going to be doing a little minigame where we're going to determine the game with the worst Easter egg steps and the map with the worst Easter egg step. And now with all of that said, let's begin this adventure, lads. Starting this video off, we have one of the simplest Easter eggs in all of Zombies. Despite that, however, it also has one of the stupidest steps in all of Zombies. The last step of the Ascension Easter egg requires you to go to this white orb by the Stamina Up lunar lander. Once you're there, you have to throw a Gersh device at this white orb and have every single player in the game do as much damage as possible to this white orb while the Gersh device is active. If this step is done correctly, then the white orb will start floating and then you finish the Easter egg. Constantly shooting a singular target for a few seconds sounds really easy for an Easter egg step. However, in this particular case, the amount of damage that the game requires you to do is absolutely absurd. The bare minimum that you need to finish this step is as follows: 1 thunder gun, 2 ray guns, and a Matryoshka doll. Every single item that I just mentioned, plus the Gersh device that is required to start up this step, are wonder weapons. and they can only be acquired from the box. Something to be noted is that Black Ops 1 in particular is one of the only games where wonder weapons are extremely difficult to get out of the box. But this step requires you to get 5 wonder weapons. You can imagine how potentially infuriating this step can be. And it was in this gameplay right here. In this particular gameplay, I was the only person out of my entire team that was getting any of the equipment. I got a Gersh device and a Matryoshka doll twice, and none of my teammates got any of them. What instead happened is one of my teammates disconnected, making it impossible for us to complete the step. Out of every single luck-based step in zombies, which a lot of it is going to be in this video, this one is easily the worst. Next up, we have another simple Easter egg in Call of the Dead, and the step we have here is the dial step. In the lighthouse, there's going to be 4 dials, and each of them reside in a certain floor. You have to get the dials to spell the code 2746 from top to bottom. The code is the exact same every single game, so this Easter egg step sounds pretty straightforward. The thing about the dials is that the way that they work is more complicated than you would think. Whenever you turn one of the dials, all dials adjacent to it will also turn along with it. For example, if I were to turn the dial in the 2nd floor, then the dial in the 3rd floor and the 1st floor will also turn with it. While I find this to be an arbitrary way to make this Easter egg step take longer, I can't really complain too much because it's the exact same code every single game, and the only reason this step is taking the worst spot is because every other step is even more straightforward than this one. Next up, we have Shangri-La, and the step that we have here is ball.
Oh, ball? Do I get ball? Ball! Yes!
The step requires you to go by this water slide where you're going to find this ball. You have to lead this ball from the water slide to the geyser by the AK-74U. But in order to get this ball to move, you have to shrink it using the baby gun. This wonder weapon in particular is notorious for being one of the most rare weapons out of the box. And unlike the orb step in Ascension where it was the last step of the Easter egg, this is one of the earliest steps of the Shangri-La Easter egg. Forcing the player to hit the box for such a rare weapon at such an early stage of this Easter egg is very agonizing. It's nowhere near as bad as Ascension, but it's still a pretty bad step. The last map we have for Black Ops 1 is Moon, and the step we have here is Ball.
Yes! Yes! I'm just as excited as before!
The step here requires you to get this ball from Tunnel 6 all the way to the MPD room. In order to get this ball, you have to get Excavator Pi to decompress Tunnel 6. Before I go on, I need to explain how the excavators work. There are 3 different excavators and each of them hit a specific area of the map. Every few rounds, only one of these excavators will activate. So if you don't get Tunnel 6, you're forced to wait a few rounds just for the chance to get it. And the thing about the excavators is that they don't operate on a cycle, so it is possible that you can get the exact same excavator multiple times in a row. Due to this, it's possible that you will get the wrong excavator 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times in a row. Now, does this happen often? Not really, but the fact that it's possible to spend over 20 rounds trying to do this step is absolutely ridiculous. Wrapping up my final thoughts on Black Ops 1, the Easter eggs were surprisingly better than I thought they would be. For this game to be the first one to experiment with Easter eggs, you'd think that the Easter eggs are very primitive and not very well designed. But most of the steps in each Easter egg were pretty good, except for the ones that required luck. But the bad steps in this game don't even compare to the sheer tragedy that is the next game. Starting off Black Ops 2, we have the first map in this video that I actually had difficulty picking the step for, and that's Transit, all of which are from the Richthofen side. The Maxis side of this Easter egg is actually not too bad. The Richthofen side, on the other hand, is disastrous. This Easter egg has 3 steps, and 2 of them are god-awful. The steps in question are the first step, where you have to get a jet gun and break it under the pylon, and the last step, where you have to throw 4 EMP grenades at 4 different different lampposts. Ultimately, I decided to pick the EMP step. The following step requires you to throw 4 EMP grenades at 4 different lampposts within a very short time frame. Now, there are 2 different ways that you can do this step. One of them you can do solo, and the other one you can do co-op. I personally have only done the co-op version of this step, so I'm not going to be talking about the solo version. But anyway, in order to do this step, you need to get 2 players to get EMP grenades. After that is done, these 2 players will go to 2 different lampposts and lead a denizen to each lamppost so they can make a teleporter in each lamppost. From there, the 2 players in tandem will throw the EMP grenades at each lamppost, then use the teleporter of each lamppost, and then throw another EMP grenade at the lamppost that they teleport to. This is one of these steps where the problems get progressively worse. The first part of it is that you have to get 2 wonder weapons out of the box. The second part of it is that if you happen to get a teddy bear, you have to go around the entire map trying to find the box, because even with the light, it's pretty difficult to tell exactly where the box is. And then the third part of it is that this is one of the only maps in Zombies that doesn't have fire sales, which is something that for the life of me I can't comprehend why. Having no fire sales could drastically increase the amount of time that it would take to get the EMPs. And even after you get the EMPs, there's one final thing that can screw you over. See, the way that the lamppost teleporters work is that they will send you to another random lamppost, and in order to complete the step, you have to hit 4 different lampposts. So it is very possible for you and your teammate to teleport to the exact same lamppost, or for you to teleport to the lamppost that your friend EMP'd before jumping into his teleporter. If either scenario happens, you have to get a max ammo in order to try the step again. If neither scenario happens, then you finish the entire Easter egg. This step is dumb in both concept and execution, and the fact that the way that this step was intended to work was that all 4 players would get EMP grenades and throw them at the same time is really fucking absurd. Next up, we have Die Rise, and the step that we have here today is the Max's Side Buddha Room step. This is one of the easiest steps in either Easter egg. All you literally have to do is get a bunch of kills in the Buddha Room until you hear a quote from Maxis, and then get an upgraded ballistic knife and shoot it on the ground. That's it. Now, if the step is so easy, why is it the worst step in this Easter egg? The reason why is because this Easter egg step in particular is very buggy. If any player in the match buys Galvanuckles or buys Bowie Knife, or happens to down and then bleed out completely, this Easter egg step will not work regardless of what you do. Now, it is very easy to avoid buying any of the melee weapons until the step is complete, but bleeding out completely on the other hand is a more common occurrence in Die Rise than in most maps, because for one, the first 2 steps in this Easter egg require each player to be completely separated across the map. But more importantly than that, falling off the map and getting crushed by the elevator counts as bleeding out. Now, one could argue against this by simply saying skill issue, which is completely fair by the way, but occasionally there are times where no matter how skilled you are, the game will just kill you. Here's an example of which where me and my teammate used this slide to go to the mystery box room, and nothing happened to us. But when my third teammate tried doing it, the slide said no and slid him off the fucking map. Not only did he die unfairly, but because of his death, we couldn't progress with the Easter egg. So yeah, despite how easy this step is, it's occasional things like this that absolutely ruin it. Next up, we have Mob of the Dead. Gameplay wise, this map really has nothing going on in terms of Easter egg. The steps in this Easter egg really don't demand anything at all. So because of this, I can finish this section very quickly. The step in question is the panels. You have to go into Afterlife mode and go to the number panel in the spiraling staircase. From there, you have to input in a bunch of number codes and you finish the step. The thing about the step is that you can only do this specifically when the number panel itself is glitching out like this. And in order for that to happen, you have to fly the plane 3 times. Now, doing this in co-op is a little tedious because only 1 canister can be held by everyone, but other than that, there's nothing that particularly stands out as terrible. Next up, we have Buried, and the step we have here is the Richtofen Side maze step. In the maze, there's going to be 4 green gates, each of them having a lever with a distinct color. You have to interact with these levers in a specific order in order to finish the step. Now, how do you do that, you may ask? Well, I'm going to show you by using my gameplay as an example. The first thing that we had to do is that we have to interact with the levers at any random order. The first lever that we interacted with was the blue one, then the green one, then the yellow one, and finally, as you see here, I'm about to interact with the red one. Once I did that, the red one started sparking electricity. What that means is that the red lever is the final lever that you have to interact with in the order. So basically, what you have to do is that you have to try out different combinations until you find the order of each lever so you can do it correctly and finish the step. Once you understand how the step works, it's actually surprisingly simple. The problem with this step is you have to reset the combination every single time you interact with all of the levers. How do you do that, you may ask? All players must leave the maze and come back again through the witch's house. See, the problem with that is that every single time you do that, the maze layout changes. So the entire process is you go into the maze, turn on all the levers, gather any information that is important, leave the maze, come back again, relearn how to navigate the maze, get any information that you need, and so on and so on and so on until you finish the step. You can only do this so many times before it starts to impair your nervous system, especially in our case here where we had to resort to using a mod to complete the step on 2-player instead of 4-player, which made the step a lot harder because we couldn't keep track of all of the levers at once. I wouldn't say that this step is worse than any of the really bad steps we've talked about so far, but I would still consider it a bad step due to how potentially long it can be. We have come to the final map in Black Ops 2, and the step we have here is one of the most tedious steps in all of Zombies. The first step of the Origins Easter egg requires you to build every single staff and upgrade them. Now, if you're playing Origins under the best of circumstances, which is a 4-player game with each player knowing exactly what they're doing, this step is not that bad. But doing this step solo, on the other hand, is a completely different story. Now, getting all the parts for the base versions of the staffs is not my problem. In fact, I enjoy the collectathon aspect of it. What I don't like is upgrading the staffs. The game only allows you to hold one staff at a time, meaning that you have to work on each staff individually. Each staff has 4 upgrade steps, and they require you to navigate half of the entire map. Not only that, but most of the steps require you to either have the codes indented in your memory or looking it up online. Another thing is that having any form of mental error with the lightning staff switches or with the gramophone can cause severe time loss. This particular step has ruined the entire Easter egg for me because while the other steps are fun, this step takes up over 75% of the entire Easter egg, and the rest of the steps can be done in 15 minutes. What I think this step should have required is for you to only get the base versions of the staffs, because the only other step that requires the staffs in the Easter egg is the second step where you have to put them in the robots' heads. Making the step work this way will make it so that you can pick whatever staff you want, or you can even choose to not upgrade any of the staffs. What this would do is that it will completely remove the tedium of the step and also provide even more replayability. This is only my opinion, of course. I know that a lot of people enjoy this step, but I just personally don't. Wrapping up my final thoughts on Black Ops 2, this game was a very interesting one when it came to Easter eggs due to be taking 2 different directions, where a portion of it was directed by Zelensky and the other portion was directed by Blundell. And I think particularly the Easter eggs in this game suffered a lot because of this, with Zelensky being switched up by Blundell in the middle of the life cycle of this game, and Blundell being very new to designing zombies maps. But after the life cycle of Black Ops 2 ended, Blundell was given a lot more freedom and time to develop his Easter eggs, which has definitely resulted in a much better improvement in the next game. But before we talk about Black Ops 3, we first have to talk about the zombies entries from Sledgehammer and Infinity Ward. I've always found their take on Call of Duty Zombies to be a very interesting one, and because of that, I wanted to include them in this video. Unfortunately though, I have not played their games enough to give a concise opinion about any of their Easter eggs, so if I wanted to include the non-Treyarch games in this video, I'm gonna need some help. And of course, there's no one that is better suited to cover these games than this fucking legend.
Hello there, fellow zombie slayers. My name is Stanley557. Terrible Easter egg steps. You hate them, I hate them, and there's no games that display horrible steps better than Call of Duty zombie entries not made by Treyarch. But before we begin, huge shout out to Zesty Moon for having me on today to cover the games like Exo Zombies, IW Zombies, and World War II Zombies. I'm always happy to help. Now without further ado, let's begin. Ironically enough, Exo Zombies Outbreak doesn't exactly have too many terrible steps. The main quest of the map is rather easy, and funny enough, is a great first quest for players to try. But this is Exo Zombies, a mode infamous for its difficulty and aggressive AI. None of these steps are by any means bad, but if I had to pick one, I'd easily go with collecting Deckard's keycard. By jumping into the trash chute by a very specific means, players can end up in the Atlas Furnace Room, and by blindly shooting the ground, players are attempting to dig up the keycard found within all the trash underneath the ground. The problem comes in the dust that kicks up whenever you shoot the ground, making it extremely difficult to see the keycard appearing out of the ground. It's definitely one of those blink and you'll miss it moments. Thankfully, most of this can be easily bypassed by simply spamming the interact button between firing and reloading. Although, it doesn't help you can only visit the furnace room once per round. And because Exo Zombies gets exponentially more difficult the later into the rounds that you get, it's imperative that you finish the egg quickly. Infection. Now let's get into an actual bad step. In Infection, players are required to build a burger for the robot overlord Bubby. To build said burger, players have to traverse the map's 4 main areas and collect pieces of meat. These can hide in obvious plain sight, or they're completely obscured from view and just slightly outside of the playable area. And because the map's primary colors are gray and brown, be my guest and explore the map for the pieces of meat. And with 37 fun-filled static locations, this step absolutely requires a guide to complete under most normal circumstances, unless you're just some kind of meat god. To add on to all of that, the undead bleed out after being alive for 5 minutes, making it impossible for players to simply train a zombie while they look for the meat. And, add all of that together 4 times, you get an egregious Easter egg step that might just be one of the worst in the series. The quest, and most specifically this step, feel like excessive padding and obscurity for the sake of obscurity, a common trend found in many of the maps we're going to be talking about. Carrier, a behemoth of an egg that features many aggravating steps that force players to either rise to the occasion or crash and burn. But probably one of the worst steps has to be the teleporter step. To escape the map, players have to complete multiple tasks and objectives, one of which includes collecting and inserting 20 teleport fragments found from teleporter zombies into an unmarked and damaged teleporter. This step can take a lengthy amount of time. Teleport fragments can only be carried one at a time, and the teleporter is situated in an extremely precarious spot, making it difficult to transport fragments, and if you aren't careful, it's easy to take a careless down. And once the teleporter is fully powered, players have to collect a shovel and make their way to the faraway island, where you must fruitlessly dig around in a vain attempt to find the tablet needed to progress the quest. This step can take anywhere from 5 to 30 minutes depending on how well the RNG favors you. This step is awful because of its long setup process, which is only rewarded with chasing pipe dreams on an island. And finally, there's Descent, the longest of the 4 eggs, but what's the worst step? If I had to choose one, it'd probably be the EMZ generator step. Found by the Exo room, players are required to fill the device with EMZ pulse charges. This step is awful for its slow progression, and much like the teleporter step on Carrier, the generators are found in a tight and hard to maneuver spot, leading to downs galore if you aren't careful. What makes it even more painful is the fact that the step requires EMZ zombies, with the EMZs needing to do their EMP pulse to count towards progression. What a mess. If you've ever played the Descent Easter egg, then you know this step is always a groaner. This step and Carriers are both weighed down by the difficult and aggressive undead AI that plague these games, making it hard to train around the undead, and much less corral them properly, and in these steps cases, isolate specific special enemies. But if I had to rank the 4 steps, I'd say Outbreaks is the least egregious of the 4 due to simplistic nature, Infection comes up next and is a difficult and mind-bending Easter egg hunt, but at the end of the day, it's an Easter egg hunt. There's no actual skill or difficulty required, just a lot of hunting. Then there's Descent and Carrier, both interchangeably terrible steps, but if I had to pick one that's easier than the other, I'd say it's Carrier's teleporter step, because players can take their time collecting teleport fragments in an open and isolated environment, whereas Descent's EMZ step requires players to huddle themselves close to the generators, and have an EMZ discharge on them. But with all that said, let's hand it back to Zesty.
While I do say that Black Ops 3 was a much better game in terms of Easter eggs than its predecessors, it still had a lot of rough steps. Starting off with one of the most aggravating steps in all of zombies. The final step of the Shadows of Evil Easter egg requires to have one player in each tram station. In each tram station, there's going to be an electrical box where each player has to shock it using beast mode. And in the middle of the map, there's going to be a couple of keepers hanging out. What the fourth player has to do is to activate the tram and then go into the middle of the map and shock these keepers. If this is done correctly, then you finish the Easter egg and get the cutscene. Something that you may have noticed while I was explaining this Easter egg step is that it requires 4 players, which is weird because every other step before this one is coded to work with any number of players. This step is basically a massive fuck you from the developers to anyone that isn't playing in a full squad. Also, I have a genuine question. What is exactly the purpose of this step? I mean, don't we have the Shadow Man already in the summoning key? Why the fuck are we dealing with this giant-ass worm? Regardless, this step makes the Easter egg completely inaccessible, which is sad because this is a really good Easter egg. I am still surprised that to this day they have never reworked this step to work with any number of players. But now we can move on to maps that don't have nearly as bad of steps. Next up, we have the Horizon Drag. The step we have here is the Wisp step. The following step requires you to shoot 4 wisps around the map with your upgraded bow. The 4 wisps don't come in simultaneously, they come in sequence. What I mean by that is only one of them will appear at a time. You have to shoot that one in order for the next one to spawn in. Once you shoot all 4 of them, the teleporter in the Undercroft area will allow you to time travel. For some fucking reason. You have to do this twice throughout the Easter egg. The first time you have to do this is you have to pick up a fuse as well as get a passcode. Once you've collected both, you have to place the fuse in the death ray and you have to go to this computer by the death ray and input the passcode. You also have to do this without ending the round because if you happen to end the round, the game will force you to time travel again where you have to get a new passcode and the fuse is back. The second time you have to time travel, you have to get a stone slab for the keeper step. The step isn't bad by any means, it's just a little confusing. The consequence of ending the round and the game rewriting history by changing the passcode to something else and forcing you to time travel is a little too unnecessary, and I also believe that you should have been able to just teleport once and grab everything and leave. Why are you able to pick up the blue cylinder that is used for the boss fight, but you can't pick up the keeper slab? Again, it's a very confusing step that I think the developers could have polished up a little bit more for the Easter egg to be better. Next up, we have my personal favorite zombies map, Zetsubo no Shima, and the step we have here is the zipline cog. In order to get this cog, you have to get your shield electrified and electrify the zipline by facility A. Once you electrify the zipline, use it and make sure you're above this platform right here. Once you're above the platform, click your sprint button and your melee button at the same time. This will cause you to drop to the platform and from there you can pick up your cog. In order to get your shield electrified, you have to complete your challenges. Most of the challenges in Zetsubo are pretty easy, like for example shooting 5 spores, or shooting the heads of 5 thrashers, or getting kills using traps. Other challenges require very specific conditions to be completed, like for example there's this challenge where you have to kill 3 zombies while they're in the process of becoming a thrasher. This type of challenge can be easily done if you're in an early round and you can get a bunch of zombies by a spore and shoot it. But if you're in a later round, the process becomes a bit harder because zombies gain more health, meaning that you have to get a more powerful weapon. However, the main reason why I picked this step as the worst one in this Easter egg is because the amount of challenges that you have to do increase with the amount of players that you have. Each player has to do 3 challenges, meaning if you're playing a 4-player game, you have to collectively complete 12 challenges. If the players in your game aren't really that good at completing these challenges, this step can take you a while. Next up, we have Gorod Krovi, and the step that we have here is the valve step. The step requires you to get this pink cylinder from one of the valves around the map. In order to get the cylinder, you have to go to every other valve and rotate the valve's hand to a specific number. Now, how do you know which numbers to input in which valve? Well, there's two factors that determine the numbers. The first factor is one of the valves will have a green light. And the second factor is that one of the other valves will have the cylinder in it. Once you know which valve is lit green and which valve has the cylinder, you now have to go into an external website using your phone or your PC and look up the code. What, did you expect that you can actually get the code in-game without using a website? No, that would be silly. I am convinced that this step was designed with the sole purpose of padding out the Easter egg hunt as much as possible. Most of the people doing this Easter egg don't even understand what you're doing exactly with this step. So I'm going to explain it to you. Feel free to skip this bit because this step is a little complicated and it's going to take me a little bit of time to explain it. In order to get the cylinder, you have to circulate power throughout every single valve. The valve that is lit green is the power generator, and the numbers on that valve signify the place where the power is being sent. For example, let's say that the valve with the green light is in the supply depot. This is the area where Speed Cola is. If you were to put the valve hand at number 1, then the power will be sent to the valve in the Dragon command, which is the area that has the power switch. But if you were to change the valve hand from 1 to 2, then the power will be sent to the armory. This is the building that is directly by the supply depot, and it's the one that has the Wonder Fizz machine. And finally, if you were to put the valve hand at the number 3, then the power will be sent to the tank factory. This is the area that has the destroyed robot leaning by the building. Once you change the valve hand to any of the specific areas I mentioned, if you were to go there, you'll find that the valve is now lit blue, meaning that it has power in it. The blue lit valve will have 3 numbers that signify 3 other different locations, and you have to change the valve hand of this blue lit valve to one of the 3 other locations, and once you do that, then that third location will also have a blue light. So basically, the objective of this step is to go to the green lit valve and send power in a very specific way so that every other valve is lit blue. And once every single other valve is lit blue, you can finally get the cylinder. Remember earlier when I said that this step was specifically designed to pad out the Easter egg hunt as much as possible? Well, there's 2 reasons for this. The first reason is that the locations that the valve is sending power to are not labeled by abbreviations of the location or the name of the location. Instead, the developers want to fuck with you by labeling them in numbers that don't mean anything. So the only way to know where the power is being sent from the green valve is looking at the blue valves. And even that doesn't give you sufficient information because multiple valves can be lit blue at the same time, which means that there isn't a reliable way to know exactly where your power is going. Now, common sense would tell you that maybe the 3 locations on the valve are the 3 locations adjacent to the location you're at. That is what I initially thought until I made a diagram that connected all the areas, and here's how it looks like. Look, I may not be a mechanical engineer, but I can tell that this diagram doesn't make any fucking sense. The thing about this step for me is that if the valve locations were actually labeled by locations, then this would have been a really good Easter egg step. Instead, Treyarch had the design philosophy of making it as complicated as possible, which by the way did not amount to anything because this Easter egg was still solved in under 48 hours. I went on a bit of a tangent with this one, but it's because this step is really dumb. The last map that we have to talk about is Revelations, and this one is one I actually struggled with. You can really pick any step in this Easter egg and you're gonna have a good reason for it. But ultimately, I decided to pick the Pack-a-Punch reel. The step requires you to go into the apothecant's stomach and throw 9 little Arnies in 9 holes in the stomach walls. Every 3 little Arnies you throw, there's going to be 3 Margwas that spawn in. Once you kill the Margwas, you can throw 3 other little Arnies where another set of 3 Margwas will spawn in. Once you throw all 9 little Arnies and kill the last set of Margwas, you can finally get the reel and finish the step. The step is heavily reliant on max ammos because the game only allows you to hold 3 little Arnies at once, which means that you have to rely on either a a gobblegum to spawn a max ammo for you, or you have to rely on the margwas that may drop a max ammo when you kill them. If you don't have a gobblegum that gives you max ammos, or the margwas don't give you a max ammo, you're forced to wait inside the apothecan's stomach, because if you leave, the step will reset to 0, meaning that you have to throw another 9 little Arnies. Not a step that I particularly hate, but its reliance on luck is the reason why I have it as the worst in Revelations. As I mentioned in the beginning of this section, this game does have a lot of rough steps, but the Easter eggs for the most part are consistently good. Which is funny because now we're going into a game that is the most inconsistent when it comes to Easter eggs. But before we go into Black Ops 4, there's still a couple of non-Treyarch games that we have to talk about. So lads, I'm gonna take 5 and let Stanley take the stage.
Infinite Warfare Zombies, one of my favorite zombies entries, second to none to Exos. But as much as I adore this quirky take on the undead, how are those infamous Easter egg steps? Well, let's find out. Zombies in Spaceland is easily my favorite of the IW catalog, but there's only 2 steps in this egg to talk about, the SETI comms and the boss fight. And if you've seen my Spaceland review, then you know I have issues with both of these steps. But if I had to pick one, it'd be the map's boss fight in co-op. Trapped in a cramped arena, forced to fight lethal aliens, an unfair AI system that summons zombies directly underneath players' feet, and assuming you're playing with 3 other teammates, the fight becomes a complete and total disaster without director's cut, becoming a nightmare that ends as quickly as it begins. Rave in the Redwoods is also another relatively short Easter egg, and just like Outbreak, there aren't really any terrible steps, but for the sake of the video, I'll list the worst one. To complete the Easter egg, players have to perform 3 various rituals, with the worst being the first one, as it can be quite frustrating to gib undead arms with a weak enough weapon, while also having one strong enough to defeat the slasher, an enemy that can insta-kill you if you aren't careful. But this is one of the few maps in the series where there aren't really any bad steps, with the map's worst features coming from IW's direction and design decisions with gameplay, rather than any particularly awful steps. Like, for example, how much damage the slasher does, even though the step that the slasher appears on isn't actually a bad step. But the next few maps seem to change that entirely. Challenge Shuffle. Finally, a good reason to make this video. Challenge Shuffle has a ton of awful steps, from the I Spy hunt, to the Morse code, to even the map's boss fight. But none of that compares to Shaolin's word puzzle step. To complete this step, players have to decipher and complete a word using the devil's alphabet. What makes this step awful is the requirement of 2 separate guides to complete it. Players need both a translation guide for the devil's alphabet and a word guide for the solvable words players need to spell, with it being possible that players will have to guess which word the answer might be depending on the letters that surround them. Needlessly clunky, and made for the sake of slowing down the Easter egg hunt, this step is a prime example of an awful Easter egg step. It's a good thing the next map doesn't harbor the most infamous Easter egg step of all time, right? In Attack of the Radioactive Thing, any seasoned Easter egg player needs no introduction to the chemistry step. One of the worst Easter egg steps of all time, that requires needless running around, internet guides, and walkthroughs galore. And not only that, there's just a ton of parts scattered around the map that need to be collected ad nauseum. Hardly any of this could be considered engaging gameplay for zombies. And even with simplified guides, the process can be quite arduous for first-time players. This step is an antithesis to fighting the undead. It's busy work. It's a task to be completed that hardly creates any enjoyment among most players. The paramount of awful Easter egg steps. But hey, I know there's a fan of it out there somewhere. The Beast from Beyond. In the final map for Infinite Warfare Zombies, the Beast from Beyond goes for a much shorter main quest, but one that still bears an awful step. The boss fight. One of the most difficult in the series, in fact. There's jumping cryptids, destructive rhinos, burning mammoths, and an extremely tight arena layout. The cryptid assault is the opposite of attack's chemistry, as it has all of the combat pieces necessary to coincide with a fun main quest finale. But anyone who's played it knows exactly how difficult this fight is, and for all the wrong reasons. There's multiple different phases players have to traverse through, and if you don't have specific setups and weapons in place, the fight becomes futile for first-time players, and if not impossible. And it doesn't help how much damage the cryptids do to players in comparison to their speed and combat prowess. Downs will happen in seconds, and if players take a wrong turn, the fight can be over instantly. The boss fight's only gleaming beam of hope being access to Director's Cut following the fight should players have the other main quest already completed. The boss fight would have you say to yourself, what were they thinking? And even being able to beat it is an accomplishment all by itself. But let's rank those maps once again. From most bearable to worst, let's start out with the Rave's Arm Ritual, a relatively easy step that becomes more difficult due to the slasher's high damage and aggressive AI. Next up is Shaolin Shuffle's Demon Puzzle. Despite committing the zombie's Easter egg cardinal sin of needing an outside guide, the step itself is busy work. Boring busy work, but busy work nonetheless. And honestly, it's really not as difficult as I'm making it out to be. Next up is Spaceland's boss fight. While I find the experience to be overtuned in the undead's favor, it's a boss fight that requires legitimate skill to beat, even if it's unfair in co-op. Then there's the infamous chemistry step in Attack. Much like Shaolin, this step was developed to pad out the Easter egg run and the main quest hunt, as Spaceland and Rave were criticized for having shorter main quest. But believe it or not, I don't think it's IW's worst step. While everything involved in its completion is, to put it bluntly, awful, I truly believe Beast from Beyond's cryptid fight to be the worst in the game. While Attack's chemistry can be solved with patience, the cryptids are an unrelenting force of nature. While the fight can be judged for its difficulty in a good way, one that challenges players, the fight is anything but, and it's a blight on the franchise that shows future developers how not to implement aggressive enemies in a game with as few defensive options as IW. World War II Zombies, an excellent and underrated experience, but one with plenty of blemishes and missteps. Arguably the most out of any of the entries reviewed today. The Final Reich, an easy top 10 zombies map. But if I had to announce one of the map's many Easter egg steps, I'd say it's the record player step, which can be found at the end of the hardcore Final Reich Easter egg. Requiring specifically melee kills, this step doesn't exactly gel well with the game's enemy variety. And because this is the hardcore Easter egg, you'll most likely be anywhere between rounds 18 to 25 when you finally get to this step, forcing you to wait till a pest round to progress safely. And even then, if you're in solo, you'll need to be at about round 30 before you even have enough pests to progress to the step, barring you properly kill them all with the Red Talon without going down yourself. A messy step found right at the end of an amazing skill-based main quest. The Darkest Shore, a long main quest but one with many different terrible steps to choose from, but my least favorite might have to be the Pest Trial. An irritating Easter egg step that requires players to launch ricocheting saw blades around the map toward a charged pest that must be powered up with the energy of these ricocheting saws. If you use a video guide, it's pretty easy to line up these shots, but the one at the top of the bunker is easily the most difficult, and even with a guide in hand, lining up these shots is nothing short of a miracle. It's truly something that has to be seen to be believed, especially in solo. Next up is the Shadow Throne. Easily the map's worst step is the Dancer's Dagger Safe, which requires players to fill up 4 various dolls around the map with undead kills, with each doll being an input on the safe that the dagger resides in. This can be easy to mess up, and if you miscount or accidentally kill a zombie too far away, or you kill too many at once and lose track, it can be very difficult to figure out what your number is without going back through the cycle all over again. And it doesn't help once you begin inputting the numbers into the safe, there's no indicator on how to open it, much less if you're doing it right. And all this amounts to a lengthy main quest step that you'll have to repeat over and over again until you just kind of figure it out. The Tortured Path. Where to begin? With 3 fun-filled objective-based maps to play through, the worst step can be found in the mode's final map, Beneath the Ice. Needing to enter in a code 3 separate times, players are required to search for the codes on even-numbered rounds and push the main quest late into the run, or suffer through inputting 25 different codes 3 separate times, making this Easter egg an absolute horror show. Just look at this! Look at this! This is all you're doing for upwards of 20 minutes if you're unlucky with the code that you get. Now, is this step worse than Attack's chemistry and Beast boss fight? I'd say it's debatable. But unlike the unfair nature of Beast boss fight and the confusing process of Attack's chemistry, the Tortured Path simply requires you to enter in codes into this rune wall. And much like Attack's chemistry, it was most likely included to pad out the Easter egg. But considering this is the final couple of steps of a multi-map Easter egg, it's safe to say that this step ranks quite high as one of the worst. And finally, there's the Frozen Dawn, a main quest tied to the creation and upgrading of 4 Thulian wonder weapons. Honestly, there's a ton of different steps to pick and choose from, but you know what, I think I'd say the worst has to be unlocking the Thulian Flail. A confusing puzzle that requires players to hunt down 2 books and 3 gears, which can be found at various different locations around the map. And once players have collected everything, they have to solve a head-scratching puzzle that requires you to align 4 planetary orbs in a specific configuration, with the pattern changing every game. This puzzle can be solved by flipping the hint vertically and adjusting the planets based off of a counterclockwise position. It sounds confusing, and in practice it might as well be, but the only silver lining being that the orbs make a loud and distinct sound when properly put into place, making it easier for players to guess and check their work. And after doing all of that work, you finally unlock an underpowered wonder weapon. So how would I rank these steps? Starting out with the easiest, there's the Frozen Dawn's Thulian puzzle. It's most likely the easiest despite its convoluted nature. Then there's the Final Rex Gramophone step, which can be beaten easily in co-op and worked around in solo by simply waiting until a later round. Next up is the Pest Ritual on the Darkest Shore. If you like aiming and ricocheting buzzsaws, then this step is for you. While the process is satisfying to learn, that shot at the top of the bunker is awful, and you'll most likely spend your time up there praying the saw actually hits the pest in a timely. Then there's the Tortured Path's Rune Wall. While not as difficult as some other steps listed tonight, it earns its high placement as an awful step for requiring players to complete it 3 separate times. And not only that, it appears at the end of an already difficult main quest. All of these reasons truly put it into the spotlight. And finally, there's the Shadowed Throne's Safe Step, a process I will continue to condemn until the day I die. Slow, convoluted, and needlessly unfair to new players, the step requires more than it should, and the lack of indicators on the safe make the step one of my personal least favorite. Every time I play the Shadowed Throne is now always met with a groan every time I remember I have to complete the step to do the Easter egg. And those are the rankings for every single worst step in AW, IW, and World War II. Huge shout out for Zesty Moon for having me on today.
Let's start off Black Ops 4 with one of the worst beginning steps to any Easter egg, and that is of course 9's Dano Challenge. The Dano Challenge in and out of itself is actually a rather simple and fun step. You'll be teleported to a nighttime version of this map where you have to cleanse this tree in the Dano Tower, and you do this by shooting the spores in the tree itself. I don't have an issue with that. In fact, I have a lot of fun doing it. What I have a problem with is actually accessing the challenge itself. What you have to do is you have to gather a few ingredients and mix them up together to make a fertilizer. Getting these items require things like finding a very specific skull in the Pack-a-Punch room and turn it into powder, getting a wooden spike by getting a gladiator to throw his axe at one of the pyres in spawn, and finally you have to get the crowd to throw their feces at you, and you do this by being as much of a disappointment as Aiden Ross. Once you've collected all 3 parts, you can now start mixing them. Here's how it goes. You have to go to the Odin Tower and put the wood on top of this cauldron, and you have to wait 2 rounds that don't include a special round. Once those 2 rounds are complete, you now go to the Zeus Tower and put all of your ingredients in this bowl, and you have to wait another 2 rounds that don't include a special round. Once that's done, you finally go to the Danu Tower and put all of your ingredients in the lower floor, and then you have to wait another 2 rounds that don't include a special round. Once that's done, you can finally begin the challenge. One noteworthy thing I have to mention is that the gladiator that you need to get the wooden piece in spawn doesn't spawn in until round 10, and round 12 or 13 will be a special round. What this means is that you can only begin this challenge a minimum of round 17. Now you may be asking, what about the gladiator that spawns in when you try to unlock Pack-a-Punch? Can't you use him to get the wooden piece? See, the developers actually thought of that and made it so that you can only get this piece after you unlock Pack-a-Punch. So the gladiator that spawns in while you're trying to unlock Pack-a-Punch is completely useless. To give the step some credit, it does give you room to set up for the rest of the Easter egg, but no form of setup would take anyone 17 rounds. It's a shame too, because this step is actually fun, but this one aspect of it utterly ruins it. Next up, we have quite possibly the most hated map in all of Zombies, Void of Despair. And the step we have here is the infamous clock step. Often regarded as one of the worst steps ever made in any Easter egg, the clock step is the very first step of the Void of Despair Easter egg. Here's how this step works. Around the map, there's going to be 4 symbols that spawn in once you open Pack-a-Punch. These 4 symbols can spawn in a set of 6 locations. Each symbol has a clock that corresponds to it, and that clock will always be in the same room that the symbol is in. Each clock will be set in a specific time, and you have to write down or memorize what time it is on each clock. Once you've acquired the numbers of all of the clocks, you can now input them in 8 dials around the map. 4 of these dials will represent the minute hand of each clock, and the other 4 dials will represent the hour hand of each clock. Once you input all the numbers, you have finished the step. Now, in my personal opinion, saying that this is one of the worst steps ever made when you consider the other Easter eggs in Zombies is rather ridiculous to me. I would even say that a lot of the steps that I've covered so far are way worse than this, but it is not a particularly fun step either. First of all, this step can be occasionally glitchy. Occasionally, one of the symbols for the clocks will glitch out and will instead be a duplicate of another symbol. For example, in this gameplay you see right here, I found this symbol in the mail rooms, and then when you go to the other side of the ship in the provisions area, I found the same symbol. While this doesn't make the step impossible, it does make it more difficult to know exactly which clock corresponds to which symbol. And the only way to do this is by going through trial and error to figure out which clock is correct, which adds more work to a step that isn't really that exciting to do. And like Origins, having a mental error throughout this process can cause some time loss. But even with these two things in mind, I more so see this step as a small hurdle that I have to go over, rather than this torturous endeavor that puts so much strain on your body that even the most strong-willed of people can't endure. Not a good step by any means, but it's definitely over-exaggerated. Next up, we have what is by far the most difficult decision that I had to make in this entire video, and that's Blood of the Dead. A very interesting thing about the Blood of the Dead Easter egg for me is that the steps themselves aren't particularly bad. It's the game being relentlessly insistent on including the shield mechanic as much as it could. It adds this compound effect where the more you use the shield, the more unbearable the Easter egg becomes, at least for me. But since this is the case, it made it extremely difficult for me to pick a step for this Easter egg. It was like being an inmate in death row and trying to pick out your last meal before you die. But ultimately, I've decided to pick the bird step. In order to do this step, you have to interact with this book in spawn, and then a bird will spawn in around the map. You have to shoot this bird with a shield blast once per round 4 times. Each time you shoot the bird, it will disappear, and then you have to find it in a different location next round. The first and last time you have to find the bird, it will spawn in a few set locations. The first time you have to find the bird, it will spawn in somewhere in the cell block, like for example by the warden's office, or by the original mob spawn, by the cafeteria, these sort of areas. The second and third time you have to find the bird, it will spawn in anywhere. And by anywhere, I literally mean anywhere. By the docks, by the warden's office, by spawn, by the infirmary, on the rooftop. It could spawn literally anywhere. The final time you have to find the bird, you have to spawn a zombie blood using the number panel in the spiraling staircase and look around for bird locations that are close to the spiraling staircase. Once you finally find the bird while you're in zombie blood, throw a Hell's Retriever at it and then you finish this step. Over the years of Blood of the Dead's release, this step has gotten easier over time. As I mentioned, the first and last time you have to find the bird, it spawns in a few set locations. And for the second and third time, there's an exploit you can do by ending the round and looking out into the docks area, where this vivid blue light will show up, which allows you to narrow down where the bird is. But these two factors don't help with the main problem of this step, which is Blood of the Dead's atrocious map layout. Since the map layout of this map is a bunch of new areas added onto the mob prison with very minimal changes, it makes the layout extremely clunky. And the map only has 3 forms of map travel, despite being almost twice as big as Mob of the Dead. Essentially, most of this step is you running around for a few minutes trying to find the bird, essentially doing nothing. Now, unlike 9, you can actually do some noteworthy setup while doing this step, because unlike 9's 17 rounds, this one is only 4. But mindlessly running loops around the map trying to find the bird gets repetitive and obnoxious really quickly. Next up, we have Dead of the Night, and the step we have here is the Greenhouse Challenge. What you have to do in this step is to clear the clouds using this telescope. In order to do this, you have to shoot this pylon on top of the graveyard using silver bullets. This will cause a beam of light to come out of this beacon and go into the main hall area. From there, you have to go into the main hall and redirect this beam to the greenhouse area using these controls right here. Once you do this, you go into the greenhouse area and input in a passcode that you have to acquire in order to get access to the telescope. Once that's done, you can finally open up the rooftop so that the light can reach the sky, and from there you complete the step. Most of the step is fine, even the part where you have to align the beam of light in the main hall area. However, what makes this step the noteworthy worst step in this egg is the part where you have to get the passcode. The passcode is 3 symbols in a specific order. These 3 symbols can spawn in a set of 7 locations. Now, how do you figure out the order, you may ask? Each symbol has a specific number of tallies, and the order of the symbols is from the one that has the least amount of tallies to the one that has the highest amount of tallies. Now, how do you figure out the number of tallies, you may ask? Well, each location that has a symbol also has 3 other corresponding locations that have tally marks. The number of tally marks in each location is from 0 to 5, and you have to add the number of each location together to find the combined number of tallies for each symbol. Since every symbol location has 3 corresponding tally locations, you have to keep tab over 28 different locations for this one step alone. Like, why? Why is it that out of every single method that you could have used to articulate to the player the order of these symbols for the passcode, you pick this? I feel like this was an active attempt to make the Easter egg hunt take longer, and they sort of succeeded with that. Back when Dead of the Night released, no one had a definitive way to figure out the order of these symbols. Some of them didn't even know that the scratch marks were there, so they tried out a bunch of unorthodox strategies in order to figure out the symbols, not knowing that what they're doing is essentially relying on luck for it to work. Had this step had a simpler way to get the order, like for example, there's only 1 tally mark location for each symbol instead of fucking 3, and you have to add them, this step would not be that bad. Next up, we have Ancient Evil, my personal favorite Easter egg, and the step we have here is the blue fire. The very first step of the Ancient Evil Easter egg requires you to ignite a blue fire in this large cauldron in spawn. In order to do this, you have to complete challenges. The challenges, or tributes as they're called in the map, are basically the trials from Cold War. You pay a tribute in the spawn room, and then a challenge will be given to you. The challenges range from staying in a specific area for as long as you can, killing zombies in a specific area, killing zombies with specific weapons like the shield, and so much more. Every challenge will be active for only 2 minutes, so you have to do as much of it as you possibly could. As you complete the challenge, you'll start getting rewards, and the more you complete the challenge, the better rewards you'll get. Starting off with the common tier, then the rare tier, then the legendary tier, and finally the epic tier. Once the 2-minute timer is complete, you have the choice of either redeeming your reward with its current tier or paying another tribute to increase the tier of your current reward. What this Easter egg step requires you to do is to keep redeeming rewards until the cauldron lights up blue. The progress that you make is determined by the tier of reward that you redeem. For example, in solo, if you want to complete this step with only rare tier rewards, then you'll need 5 rewards. But if you want to do it with only common tier rewards, then you'll need 18 rewards. The fastest way to complete this step is by redeeming epic tier rewards only. But regardless of your preferred method, once you've gained the sufficient amount of rewards, you'll complete this step. The problem with this step is the randomness associated with it. The difficulty of the challenge that you get determines how fast you can actually complete this step. For example, if you were to get a challenge where you have to stay in a specific area for as long as you can, you'll only be able to upgrade your reward twice at the very maximum. This challenge in particular is the slowest one out of the bunch. The fastest one, on the other hand, which is getting kills with your specialist weapon, is utterly broken. This challenge upgrades your rewards at such a fast pace that you can actually get 2 epic tier rewards with a single tribute. Here's a clip I recorded where I went from nothing to a legendary tier in less than 20 seconds. Because of this step is extremely inconsistent. Sometimes you can complete it in under 2 minutes. Other times, it can take upwards of 10 minutes to complete. The redeeming factor of this step, though, is that the rewards that you can get are actually really helpful. Sometimes you can get a pack-a-punched weapon, other times you can get a self-revive, or in my case here, I got 2 free perks. This being the worst step in this Easter egg is truly a testament to how good this Easter egg actually is. Next up, we have what I consider to be one of the more underrated Easter eggs in this game, and that's Alpha Omega. The steps in this Easter egg aren't too bad, but if I had to pick one step, it would be the Nova Crawler escort. The following step requires you to go to the bunker area of the map and find a red Nova Crawler. From there, you're going to have to escort this Nova Crawler to one of the houses in the top area of the map. This step is actually surprisingly simple, and at times, it is one of the easiest steps in this map. Other times though, this step can be extremely annoying to do. First off, the Nova Crawler can spawn anywhere in the bunker and it's never specified where exactly he spawns in. And the thing about this is that the Nova Crawler doesn't spawn in even if you're in the same general area as the Nova Crawler. For example, in this gameplay you see right here, I went looking for the Nova Crawler and the first area I checked is the generators area. I looked around this place pretty thoroughly and I haven't found the Nova Crawler. Due to this, I was convinced that the Nova Crawler wouldn't spawn in this area, so I went and looked around for every other area pretty thoroughly. I spent 5 minutes trying to find the Nova Crawler, and then I went back to the generators area, and then he suddenly spawned in. Since the Nova Crawler can spawn anywhere in the bunker, things like this can occasionally happen. When you manage to find the Nova Crawler, here's how you would escort it. The Nova Crawler works like every other zombie where it's going to follow you and try to kill you. However, if you get too far away from it, the Nova Crawler will stop following you. So you have to be as close as possible to the Nova Crawler without getting hit by it or the zombies. Normally, this isn't an issue whatsoever unless you happen to get cornered by the zombies. If this were to happen, you have to somehow get out of that situation without killing the Nova Crawler. And the problem with that is, the Nova Crawler is extremely twitchy. It has incredibly low health, and it can basically die from anything. But again, this would only happen if you get cornered. As long as you have something like an undead man walking or a winter's wail, you'll be completely fine. The step is not bad in the slightest, it's just that occasionally it can be extremely annoying to do. Ending off our Black Ops 4 section, we have Tag der Toten, and the step we have here is the red orbs. The following step is extremely simple. You're gonna go into this area where you're going to find this large red orb. You have to continuously shoot this red orb for it to disperse into 3 smaller red orbs around the map. Once your screen goes white, you can now find the 3 smaller red orbs around the map. When you find any of the orbs, you have to throw a snowball at it and then shoot it. After you do that with all of the 3 orbs, you can finally go back to this area and throw another snowball at each orb and shoot it. Once you do that with all of the 3 orbs, you can finally go to this bonfire and burn a 9-year-old German child to end the step. This step and this Easter egg as a whole aren't too bad. The thing about the step though is that it does have a lot of obnoxious elements. First of all, while you're shooting the giant red orb, there's going to be an infinite amount of zombie spawns in this very enclosed area. And the red orb that you have to shoot has a considerable amount of health, which can make this process extremely irritating to do. As for the orbs you have to find, each of the 3 orbs spawns in a designated area of the map. One orb is going to be in the spawn area, the other orbs is going to be around the lighthouse area, and finally the last orb is going to be somewhere in the facilities area. Since that's how the orbs spawn in, you're basically forced to walk around the entire map trying to find each one. But the worst part of this step is that you don't have to do it once, not twice, but 3 times throughout the Easter egg. The step isn't really too bad, but the fact that you have to do it 3 times is what makes it the worst step in this egg. Like I said earlier, Black Ops 4 is a very inconsistent game when it comes to its Easter eggs. You have some pretty amazing Easter eggs like Ancient Evil, some pretty horrendous Easter eggs like Classified, and a bunch of mediocre Easter eggs like Tag der Toten. Personally, I enjoyed most of the Easter eggs in this game, but some of them are plagued with horrible steps. But with all that said, let's see how the Easter eggs play out in the final game of this video. In terms of Easter eggs, Cold War is probably the most simple and straightforward game in the series, which also means it's probably the most underwhelming way to end this video. But regardless, let's start off this section with the machine, and the step we have here is the decontamination step. The step requires you to power up this decontamination chamber and capture a megaton inside of it. In order to power up the decontamination chamber, you have to do 2 things. First, you have to get a decontamination agent, and then you have to power it up using a power source. There's nothing much to say about getting the decontamination agent, as all it requires you to do is to throw a grenade at a tank. But in order to power up the decontamination chamber, you need to get every single upgrade for the die. This Easter egg's problem is similar to Origins, but on a much smaller scale. You make 4 wonder weapons that barely have any use in the Easter egg, and creating them is most of the Easter egg's runtime. The difference here though is that unlike the Origins staffs, the die upgrades are actually worse than the base version. Now again, this Easter egg is pretty short, so it doesn't matter too much, but it's still the worst part of this Easter egg. Next up we have Firebase Z, and the step we have here is the Mimic step. The following step requires you to capture 3 mimics using essence traps. The mimics that you have to capture are a specific type of mimic that spawns around a bunch of loot that you can't interact with. Once you come by this loot, eventually the mimic that you have to capture will spawn in. Now to capture the mimic, you can't simply just throw the essence trap and activate it. You have to shoot the mimic and get his health low enough to where he's barely alive. Once you've done that, you can finally capture the mimic. Repeat this process 2 more times and then you finish the step. This is one of these steps where there's absolutely zero consistency. Sometimes you can do this step in less than 5 minutes. Other times, you literally can't complete the step. This is because this step has a lot of bugs associated with it. Sometimes you'll try to find the items related to this mimic, but you'll never find them because they never spawn in. Sometimes the items do spawn in, but the mimic never spawns in himself. And sometimes you'll find the items, the mimic will spawn in, you capture it, but the game will tell you that you captured the wrong mimic. Do these bugs happen often? Not really. But when they do happen, they almost make this Easter egg impossible. Next up we have Outbreak, and the step we have here is the projector step. The following step requires you to find hidden film slides and put them in a projector. The slides that you have to find are hidden in one of 3 locations around the map. Once you get the slides, you now have to find the projector somewhere around the map. Once you find the projector, put the film slides in it and you finish the step. Now you may be thinking, what's so bad about trying to find a single item in 3 locations and putting it in another item that has a set location? That wouldn't be a problem if we were playing a normal round-based map. The thing is though, we're playing on Outbreak maps. Outbreak has some of the largest maps in the series, which means that trying to find these items will result in a lot of downtime. Something to be noted about this step is that you only have to do it once. So it really depends on what map you're doing the step on. For example, if you were to be doing this step on maps like Armada or Collateral, which are some of the smallest maps in Outbreak, this step would not be taking as long as it would be to be doing it on a map like Duga or Alpine. Not only that, but this step is actually impossible on one of the maps, which is Ruka, which means if the map that you travel to is Ruka while doing this step, you have to complete a full round of Outbreak to try in another map. A very simple and straightforward step, but a tedious one nonetheless. Next up, we have Mauer der Toten. The steps in this Easter egg are overall pretty good, and I don't have many complaints about them, but if I had to pick a step, it would be the canister step. The step requires you to pick up 3 canisters and charge each of them up with Tempest kills. Once you charge up any of the canisters, you have to bring them back to the bunker. While holding any of the charged up canisters, you're incapable of sprinting. So in order to get the canisters to the bunker, you have to walk there. Once you bring all 3 canisters to the bunker, you finish the step. While I would prefer that I am able to sprint while holding the canisters, I'm not making a big deal out of something that is so mildly problematic. Ending off our Cold War section, we have Forsaken, and the step we have here is the boss fight. The Forsaken boss fight is quite possibly the most painfully underwhelming fight in Zombies. And in terms of gameplay, I would argue that this boss fight is worse than the Shadowman boss fight in Black Ops 3 and the Orda fight from Firebase Z. The Forsaken himself is pretty much inactive for most of the fight, and even when he randomly does an attack, it barely does any damage. Not only is he extremely weak at attacking you, but his defenses are equally as weak. While I can say that these factors also contribute to the Shadowman and the Orda, the thing about these two boss fights is that they end extremely quickly. The Forsaken boss, on the other hand, has 4 phases, and since all of these 4 phases pretty much feel inconsequential, the boss fight genuinely feels more like a chore than an actual boss. As I mentioned earlier, Cold War is a much simpler game than every other game before it, and that is because the developers are trying to make this game mode a lot more accessible for casuals and newer players. A lot of people don't like the direction that this game is taking due to it being extremely simple and at times brain dead, but I've seen an equal amount of people liking the direction that this game is taking. To me though, it was a breath of fresh air to play Zombies without the need of looking up guides to get wonder weapons or to get the pack-a-punch machine. Compare this to Black Ops 4, where you have maps like Dead of the Night and Ancient Evil, where I would honestly be genuinely shocked if you were able to get pack-a-punch on these two maps without a guide. But the thing about this new direction for me is that while it was initially fun, it no longer has any longevity. Since all of the information is given to you immediately, you don't feel like you're discovering anything, and you don't feel like you're learning anything. The game is teaching you it. When the game is actively holding your hand in every single match you play, it's easy to think of Cold War as an extremely shallow game that lacks substance. With all that said though, I'm interested to see what Treyarch will do in their next game after listening to the criticisms of this one. Now that we are done with all of the sections, we can finally begin the minigame. But before I do that, I have to give a massive shout out to everyone who helped me out. So first and foremost, massive shout out to Stanley who made the non-Treyarch portions of this video. And also shout out to Ying, Kid Hits Blunt, Emilio, Cube, Rackman, Joe Ward, Roman, Quidos, and Frosty for helping me getting the gameplay for this video. Genuinely from the bottom of my heart, thank you to all 10 of you for helping me do this. Most of these guys are fellow YouTubers that make much better content than any of my dumbass videos, so you really should go check them out. They're incredible people. But with all that said, let's begin the minigame. While I'm doing this, I want you guys to keep in mind that I am looking at these maps from the perspective of their worst step, not the map as a whole. Now that we have established that, let's begin. The first award goes to the Call of Duty Zombies game that has the worst Easter egg steps in all of Zombies. I actually had this answer even way before I started making this video. The reward goes to Call of Duty Black Ops 2, with 4 maps being in the top 10 worst steps in Zombies. The next award is the Call of Duty Zombies map that has the worst Easter egg step of all time. I also had this answer locked in way before I made this video, and the award goes to Shadows of Evil from Black Ops 3. Now that we have given the 2 honorary awards for the Treyarch games, let's do the exact same thing but for the non-Treyarch games. First off is the Call of Duty Zombies game with the worst Easter egg steps out of the 3, and the award goes to Call of Duty Infinite Warfare, with 2 of its steps being placed in the top 5 worst steps in the non-Treyarch games. And finally, the last award I want to give is to the Call of Duty Zombies map that has the worst step out of all the non-Treyarch games. And the award goes to The Beast from Beyond from Infinite Warfare. And that is all the awards that I want to give at the end of this video. Thank you guys so much for watching this, and yeah, I have nothing more to say. You can leave now.